somebody that will want to reinforce the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. There have been fractures and fissures, not so much that we could see that they'd fall apart, but I have been seeing that Israel and the U.S. have hit a lot of leaders, and it wasn't just Khamenei, but it was about approximately 40 leaders. And last June, they took out the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and then they did again. Israel did in June, and then U.S. and Israel strikes did this time. So it was like, are they going to be able to break apart the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? And if that was to happen, then would people be able to come out in the streets? Would they feel free without the besieged militias, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, calling the shot, carrying out violence in the street, like they did the massacres? So with Mojtaba Khamenei coming in as the new successor, he also is showing that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is remaining strong and intact.
Okay, let's go now to CBS News senior foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab, who's joining us on the phone. Imtiaz, what can you tell us?
I think this is not surprising, but in itself extraordinary. Mojtaba Khamenei is the son of a man who was assassinated by the U.S. just over a week ago, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has loomed over Iran for decades. He is, of course, seen as a continuity candidate. He is somebody who has worked in the shadows, again, through his father's office. That in itself gave him extraordinary influence. He is known to be very close to the Revolutionary Guard. And that in itself is very important for anybody who's running Iran. But the reality is that Mojtaba Khamenei, although he's well known, has never held public office, has never given a speech publicly, and is now the supreme leader of a country of 90 million people who is currently being bombed by the United States and Israel. And speaking of the United States and Israel, I can't think of a single candidate who would be considered more antagonistic to President Trump and to some degree Israel than Mojtaba Khamenei. President Trump has made it clear himself that if it is Mojtaba, who he described as a lightweight, that he would not, quote, last very long in the job, essentially insinuating that Mojtaba will basically suffer the same fate as his father. But Mojtaba Khamenei is an interesting character because if you consider the dynastic politics of the region, it is very established. But Iran has fought against it, at least since the end of the Shah, because the whole point was to have a theocratic country that was ostensibly a democracy, which, of course, it wasn't. The supreme leader always had power, but they had elections, and he would choose who would win, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that they've decided to go down this path, understanding that the way it would echo a monarchist past reasserting itself in this new way, is very clear that the IRGC wanted to signal to the world and to the people that the system remains intact, and they are not going to do what Donald Trump wants or what Israel wants. And I think this brutal conflict that we're watching unfold on our screens right now, certainly on the ground being felt in Iran and elsewhere across the region, including where I am here in Doha, that this will likely ensure that the conflict we've been seeing will continue in the days, if not weeks, possibly months ahead.
And you have been in Doha since the conflict began, at least for the larger part of the week. What can you tell us about the involvement of other Gulf countries and also how people are reacting in the region?
Gulf countries are rattled by what's happening to them right now. They have spent decades trying to insulate themselves from the conflicts that we so often see rage across this region. They have built these glittering cities with the many trillions of dollars of oil wealth that they have. And that has all been shattered within a week because of Iran's ability to penetrate their airspace and to wreak havoc in these cities. They want this to end. They have made it clear to President Trump and to Israel this conflict needs to end. We understand that President Trump spoke to the Qatari Emir last night, where the Qatari Emir said to the president they need to de-escalate and they need to bring negotiations back to the table, diplomacy to the table. Of course, we then saw some of the most intense bombing of Tehran since this conflict began. So it doesn't feel like at this stage the president is listening. But the repercussions of the Gulf states seeing their economies grind to a halt, while we're not feeling it acutely yet, it will happen. Remember, even though the U.S. has become quite sufficient when it comes to its own energy production, it's not able to insulate itself from the global economy. The Gulf is very tied to the U.S. economy as well. And so at some point, we will see gas prices surge. At some point, we will see inflation spike. At some point, we will see goods that we're used to getting not being available because shipping lanes have stopped. And so these tentacles of this war is not just wrapping around the Gulf, but it'll soon start making its way across the world, into Asia, into Europe, and eventually onto U.S. shores. And the president is no doubt acutely aware of that. But the one thing that the president has not made clear to anybody is what his off-ramp is, what his actual goal is. And I think if he wanted to achieve an Iran that was going to be more pliable and more pliant, similar to what we saw in Venezuela, President himself saying he's looking for the Delphi of Iran, the decision this evening to appoint Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, is not that. It is the opposite, and it is very risky for this whole situation going forward.
And so to catch anybody up, Imtiaz there mentioning Delcy Rodriguez, who became the leader of Venezuela after the U.S. captured Nicolas Maduro, who has, for all intents and purposes, appears to be working with the United States. President Trump says the relationship is going great, and wanted to, in effect, try and duplicate what they were able to accomplish in Venezuela in Iran, which many critics have said is not possible because of the long, complex history. Imtiaz, is it your sense that Mojtaba Khamenei now will have to essentially lead in hiding because the U.S. and Israel have made threats, both veiled and completely concretely, that they are still going after the movers and shakers in Iran? Essentially, the president saying, well, he had called Mojtaba incompetent in Politico, and he also said that he wanted to have a role in finding and appointing the new leader. That clearly didn't happen. And so do you get a sense that Mojtaba Khamenei already sort of has a target on his back?
Completely. Not only does he have a target on his back, some may even argue that he is a dead man walking. We have to understand Israel and the U.S. have incredible intelligence on the ground inside Iran. They were able to kill the supreme leader on the very first day of the war. It tells you something about the level of intelligence that is available to them. Whether that's the case in this moment, it's hard to say, but the U.S. and Israel have been incredibly successful in taking out the top leadership of Iran, not just during this war that we've seen now, which is now over a week long, but also last year during the 12-day war with Israel. What I would say, though, is the one thing, I think a key thing we need to look at in this moment and wait for is what Mojtaba Khamenei says in his first address and his first speech. If he comes out and gives a blazing anti-American, anti-Israel speech, which offers no olive branches, which offers no discussion of dialogue, diplomacy, you name it, I think this conflict, as we've been saying, is only going to accelerate. And so we really need to hear what he has to say. What we know of him, again, this is not a man who's spoken in public before. This is not a man who's held a public office before. It'll be interesting to see how he plays this public role, although he's witnessed it up first with his father, up close, I should say, with his father. We don't know how he's going to wield his public persona. Again, what he says will matter. If he offers President Trump even just the hint of an off-ramp, that could be something that may spell the beginning of some sort of diplomacy, some sort of off-ramp to this conflict. But if he comes out and is harsh, stark, strident, anti-American, anti-Israeli, I suspect that he will be targeted in a very serious way by U.S. and Israeli forces. And the thing is, when we look at what we know about Mojtaba, this is not somebody who is considered a reformer. This is somebody who is considered a true believer in his father's view of Iran. And his father's view of Iran is well documented. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has presided over a regime which has ruthlessly and brutally oppressed its own people time and time again. Just in January, as we know, many thousands of people were killed for going out to the streets demanding change. That is something that Mojtaba Khamenei witnessed time and again at his father's knee. And for many Iranians tonight, looking at this decision, looking at his ascension to the very top of Iran's leadership structure, their fear is that he is going to be somebody who is going to perhaps not only be just as cruel as his father, but potentially even crueler.
You had mentioned whether his installation as supreme leader and whether his first comments could potentially offer President Trump some kind of off-ramp for this conflict. We know the goals and the objectives that the administration has outlined. They are to destroy Iranian offensive missiles, annihilate its navy, prevent it from having a nuclear weapon, and ensure the regime can't support, quote, terrorist armies outside its borders. The president has given, and other people in his administration have given, various timelines for how long this conflict could last, from 2 weeks to 4 to 6. Basically, until these objectives are met, do you see any potential off-ramp being taken when the administration so far is posturing that they are in it, not necessarily in the long run, but at least until these objectives are met?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have to acknowledge that when it comes to the military objectives that the U.S. and Israel jointly have, much of them have been achieved. Iran's Navy has been badly damaged, if not decimated. Iran's capability to carry out airstrikes, at least conventionally with its fighter jets, is essentially collapsed. While it's still able to use its Shahed drones fairly effectively, certainly across the Gulf, militarily it has been degraded very seriously. The objectives, at least from a military point of view, are being met in a very serious and fundamental way. But again, it is the personality component that I think is going to be one of the hardest things for the president to get past. He's also called for the complete collapse of the regime. He's also called for regime change. He's called on the Iranian people, President Trump that is, to rise up and to fight for new leadership. This regime remains intact because while we've talked about the U.S. and Israel's objectives here, the Iranian leadership's objective, the Iranian regime's objective, is just a singular objective, and that is survival. And so far, they have achieved that objective. And more importantly, their ability to select a supreme leader using this formalized process that was put into place after the death of the very first Ayatollah, Ruhollah Khomeini, that process was able to work, which again signals to the Iranian people, all 90 million of them, that the system, while battered and bruised, is still intact. But it also says to them, we can still crush any form of dissent if you try. And that is something very scary for many Iranians who want change, who are under bombardment and are hoping for a brighter future, are hoping for a more free Iran. And with the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei to be the next supreme leader, many Iranians tonight are no doubt looking at that and thinking, not much of their life is going to improve. If anything, it's going to become materially far worse.
All right, Imtiaz, hang out if you can, but if you cannot, I understand if you do have to run, because I do want to bring in retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being here. What is your reaction to Iran's new supreme leader, the son of the now late Ayatollah?
Well, I think the Council of Experts may have missed it on this one. I mean, the president made it pretty clear that this was not an acceptable choice. I think it's highly likely that we're going to continue our aggressive air campaign to remove their missile threat, their drone threat, their naval threat, and their ability to produce future missiles, drones, and naval capacity. And so I would hope that this has no impact on General Kane and Admiral Cooper's, 4-week or so air campaign they have planned. And I hope the president recognizes the new supreme leader for who he is, which is just the old supreme leader in a slightly younger clothing.
Do you feel as though the administration may put Mojtaba Khamenei in their crosshairs?
I suspect he's been there, and I think he'll continue there in both U.S. and Israeli crosshairs. I think the president made it clear this wasn't who he was looking for. And while we may not have a clear expectation of what regime change looks like, we do have a clear expectation of what removing their ability to impose cost on the region, through missiles, drones, and other things is. And I think we're going to continue to hammer away on that for the next 3 weeks.
What are your other commentaries or musings on the conflict so far?
I think we're approaching a really tight condition in the Straits of Hormuz. We apparently, either we or the Israelis, hit Iranian energy infrastructure, and we had generally laid off of that. That might be the final straw that causes them to more aggressively attempt to mine the Straits of Hormuz. We already have a significant backup of shipping. It's reduced about between 88 and 92%, depending on how you measure it. And no LNG ships are flowing, which means there's literally 300 ships trapped inside the Arabian Gulf now, not able to go through the Straits of Hormuz, which is very dangerous transit right now. The U.S. is probably not ready to escort ships till the conditions are set, which could be a couple weeks away. So I think the next big pressure point is going to be energy.
Do you feel as though that is going to be the pressure point that is potentially the most politically damaging for Trump, given that everyday Americans are going to potentially start paying more for gas? We're already seeing the increase in the price of oil. Do you feel that that is what is really going to get the president's attention?
I think so. I think the other pressure points would be really uncomfortable, like increased loss of personnel. That would be terrible. But the energy one's probably one that is more likely and can happen pretty quickly. I'd say we're probably within the next week, we're going to see significant decision making by what's called the Joint War Council in London that kind of sets the decision making for insurance companies and maritime shipping companies. And then there's going to be a lot of pressure on the United States. Now, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates can work around that with pipelines they've built that operate outside the Straits of Hormuz. Hopefully we'll see more of that coming online, that flow coming online. But even with that, the Straits of Hormuz is still a big deal.
Do you see the potential worst case scenario, let's say, and maybe your worst case scenario is even higher, but if oil per barrel was to go up to $150, I know Friday it was around $91 a barrel. Could we hit that within the 4 weeks, or the certain amount of weeks that the administration has said is their target here, because that timeline appears to change quite frequently?
I think that's I'm not an expert on oil prices. I will say that's a high number, and the peak for the Ukraine-Russia fighting was 120 at the start of that war. So I think that's kind of where speculation could go, but I think 150 is a pretty high number.
Do you have a sense right now that the United States is going to continue with airstrikes? I know that there's been some back and forth on whether boots on the ground is, going to be a possibility with this war. Do you feel as though the administration can accomplish its objectives without putting troops on the ground?
So this is a qualified yes, in the sense that I don't know what all their objectives are, because the president has been very unclear about what regime change means to him. The objectives I'd like to see done, which is Iran's ability to create cost for its Mideast neighbors, either Arab neighbors, Israel, or even the United States, is eliminated. That he can do with just air power and potentially like a very small soft mission into the nuclear enterprise, which I wouldn't consider boots on the ground, because the boots would be on the ground and out of the ground before it was even reported to us. So the answer is yes, it can be, unless you suddenly start making your objective for regime change, a popular revolt in the streets. That's not going to happen with just an air campaign. You have to have a fully armed adversary, interventionist army on the ground like we had in Kosovo in 1999 or in Libya in 2011. Those don't exist right now. So you're not going to get any significant regime change. So if that's a requirement, you're going to have a problem. If it's not a requirement, and it's just the requirements I've laid out of destroying their ability to impose costs, you can get that done in the next 4 weeks.
All right, Mark Montgomery, retired Rear Admiral and Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for your time, sir. And just for anyone who is joining us, we are bringing you breaking news on the war in Iran. First off, the breaking news we must tell you about is that a 7th service member, U.S. service member, has been killed in the conflict. The second piece of breaking news that we are following is that Iran has appointed a new supreme leader, and that is Mojtaba Khamenei, who is the son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. This man is in his 50s. I'm going to pull up his age right here, 57. He served in the Iran-Iraq War. He was injured there. He developed close ties with security and military services during the war, close ties with the IRGC, which we have heard from Courtney Keeley. He is the second son of the late Ayatollah. He is married. He has a son. He's been leading a secretive life. He's never given a speech, as we heard from Imtiaz. He's not really out and about. He's never held government office. He's been his father's assistant and first to counselor sign before becoming the supreme leader. He has also been teaching in a clerical school, essentially, effectively Ayatollah training. Not much here on public record, but many people that we are hearing from, including our own Imtiaz Tayyab and Courtney Keeley, is that he is much like his father. And that certainly Imtiaz characterizing this as perhaps the most antagonistic choice, antagonistic in the eyes of the U.S. and in the eyes of Israel. Let's go ahead and bring CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams into the conversation. She joins us from northern Iraq. Holly, what have you been seeing and hearing and gathering from your reporting?
Hey there, Lindsay. I think what's interesting here is that, at least superficially, this looks like a kind of choice of continuity, right? The son of the previous supreme leader. Of course, what we need to remember is that the Iranian regime, which is in a weakened state, perhaps the weakest it's ever been since the revolution of 1979, the regime wants this, needs this to look like continuity, certainly in the eyes of the outside world, but perhaps more importantly in the eyes of its own people. The question, I guess, is whether this really is continuity, whether this, the second son of the former supreme leader, will wield the same kind of power as his predecessors, or whether this is really window dressing and there will be other people inside Iran who are wielding that power. Of course, the background to all of this is that we still don't have a lot of clarity on what the end game of this war is for President Trump and for Israel. It seems they're seeking some kind of regime change, but what kind of regime change? Do they want a democratic Iran? Do they want a leader that they can do business with? Do they want, as part of that, a new nuclear deal with Iran? Even before this announcement about the new supreme leader, Israel made it clear that it will pursue any successor of the former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And Trump said recently that if the new leader doesn't get approval from us, that is the United States, he's not going to last long.
What other reaction are you tracking from where you are in the region?
Difficult to say. I guess the point to make is that so many of America's partners in this region didn't want this war to happen in the first place. They made it very clear to the United States that they thought that this war, that another attack on Iran, would be destabilizing politically and economically. So what we need to be keeping an eye on is whether they think that this choice, which is at least superficially one about continuity, is something that might bring stability. That seems unlikely given the comments of both Israel and President Trump.
Holly, days ago, President Trump told Reuters that he backs Iraqi Kurds launching an Iranian offensive. Where are we with that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is part of the, I guess, the sort of confusion or lack of clarity around the end game. So we're in northern Iraq, we're very close to Iran's border, and there are several Iranian opposition groups that operate in this area. Some of them are armed. They represent the Kurdish ethnic minority, which is around 10% of Iran's population. Now, this past week, President Trump really encouraged those groups to launch a military offensive inside Iran against the regime. We spoke to one of those groups who told us that they were in touch with the US government. They told us that they perceived America and Israel's war on Iran as an opportunity for them to launch a military offensive against the regime. When we asked them if they'd received any promises of support, they said they couldn't answer that. It was too sensitive. Then yesterday, Saturday, President Trump said that he didn't think it was a good idea to send those Kurdish groups into Iran, and they weren't needed. But when we spoke to some of those armed groups today, they said, at least when we spoke to them, that they hadn't received any communication about that. They hadn't been told to stand down. They hadn't been told that a military intervention wasn't wanted. So that just all speaks to that confusion, including in this regime, about what the end game is for this war.
Can you give us, while we have you, a little bit more historical context on why they would view this as an opportunity?
So they're very much against the regime. We've filmed with a number of these groups. Many of their members, many of their fighters who've taken up arms are women. Some of them have told us that the reason that they left Iran is that they are women and that they think that women's rights are not respected or are limited in Iran. They're also members of that Kurdish ethnic minority, around 10% of Iran's population, and they say that their people inside Iran are oppressed, and they dream one day of living in a part of Iran that's majority Kurdish that has some degree of autonomy. Of course, when we think about temptations or motivations to get involved in some kind of military offensive in Iran, despite the fact that they are massively outgunned by the Iranian regime, they only seem to have light arms. Of course, the idea of some kind of help from the US, perhaps American air cover, that's a huge temptation, a huge motivation. The idea that they would be partnered up with the most powerful military in the world, the US military, to achieve their goals inside Iran.
Holly Williams, thank you so much for joining us on this breaking news. Let's go back to Imtiaz Tyab, who is joining us now from Doha, Qatar, on the phone. Imtiaz, our own senior correspondent here at CBS News, Matt Gutman, had let us know that he asked Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's advisor, Michael Eisenberg, today about Mojtaba Khamenei today, and that his advisor basically called him a dead man walking, per your point that you were telling us within the last half hour. Eisenberg telling Matt, you know, the highest risk job right now is to be the new Ayatollah. Those are high-risk jobs, don't take them. Matt followed up with, they're going to be targeted. Eisenberg saying, don't take those jobs. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been incredibly clear about this. These are high-risk jobs. We're watching it. What do you make of that?
It absolutely is. Look, it's very clear that by being elected, the new supreme leader by this 88 board, member council, again, a signal to Iranians and indeed the world that the system is still intact. It is still able to function in the way that it has been, despite the fact so much of it has been decimated, that they are under extraordinary incoming from the U.S. They want to signal not only is the system, not only is the regime intact, but more importantly, they have this continuity candidate who happens to be the son of the former supreme leader. Again, as we were saying when we were speaking earlier, I can't think of a more antagonistic selection for supreme leader than Mojtaba Khamenei, at least when it comes to President Trump and indeed to the Israeli leadership. How the Iranian state will protect him and keep him safe, given what we've seen time and again, which is the deep intelligence on the ground that the U.S. and Israel has inside Iran, again, able to kill the supreme leader within the very first hours of their war in Iran, or with Iran, rather. It does seem that Mojtaba Khamenei most certainly is under a lot of threats and is no doubt somewhere very secure. But again, it also seems that for the Iranian regime and those who are leading it, and the most powerful forces, it has to be said, inside Iran, are the Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are, again, this potent, powerful military force, who Mojtaba Khamenei, it has to be said, has spent a lot of time cultivating very close ties with. It is one of the things that has become the most notable sort of fact point or data point about him is again and again you will read and you will hear from people who say he is very close to the Revolutionary Guard. And so whether he is just a figurehead, although one would imagine, given the fact that he was the son of the very all-powerful supreme leader, that he would not be accepting some sort of junior position, that we can expect more of the same. Some even going further, suggesting that he's even more hardline than his father, even more extreme than his father. At this stage, we just don't know who Mojtaba Khamenei, as supreme leader, is going to be. Again, this is a man who has never given a public speech. This is a man who has been seen but not heard. And so what he is going to say to the Iranian people, what he is going to say to President Trump and indeed the Israeli leadership, I think much of what happens in the next coming hours, potentially days and weeks, will hinge on what we hear from him.
Imtiaz, I am curious, before we go back to Courtney Keeley with some analysis on this, if you can tell me what day-to-day life has been looking like in Doha, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's a really important part of this equation. Yes, the U.S. and Israel and Iran are central to everything that we're talking about right now. But the Gulf has really been absorbing some of the biggest shocks here. Iran, of course, under fire, and we're seeing in Lebanon as well. But the Gulf, again, because there are so many U.S. military bases here in the region, the Iranian leadership has effectively said everything is up for grabs because Gulf territory is being used to target us. It is now a target for us. And to give you a window on just how things are looking on the ground, Kuwait City, just this morning, a strike set the country's main social security headquarters on fire. Again, you have to understand, Kuwait has one of the most powerful currencies in the world. One Kuwaiti dinar is worth around $10. It just gives you a sense of the wealth and the sort of comfort that people are used to in this part of the world. You know, largely have created these economies where they've insulated themselves from the wars that you've seen just grip so many other parts of the Middle East, and within a week that feels for many of them shattered. Again, you know, the UAE, Bahrain, other Gulf states say their air defenses are still intercepting Iranian missiles and drones every single day. And we also heard that at least one water desalination plant was targeted. And this is significant because targeting a water desalination plant, not only is it a potential war crime because millions of people rely on it, it means that not only is energy infrastructure being targeted, that is oil and gas, it also means the very thing that people need to survive, water, is now being targeted. And so for Gulf kingdoms who are incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, have huge influence over this president who has many deep business ties to this part of the world, he is no doubt listening to them and their concerns. Again, as we've been saying, just last night, the president had a very long conversation with the emir of Qatar, a person he has very close ties to. You have to remember, Qatar is a country which has gifted the president an Air Force One. That is how close this relationship is. And so the president, no doubt, is calculating and recalculating in real time how to move forward, managing the needs of the U.S. and Israel, but also allies in the Gulf region who are saying, listen, our economies, our societies cannot sustain this because the longer this continues, the more we have to slow or reduce our oil and gas capacity, which means at some point this is going to have a knock-on effect in the global economy. In fact, Qatar's own energy minister warning that if things don't improve soon, oil prices could surge to over $150 a barrel. So the question right now for the Trump administration is, can they, while they continue this war on Iran or in Iran, can they keep global energy moving while this war continues, or whether the economic shock spreads far beyond the battlefield and into the wallets of everyday Americans.
Imtiaz Tayeb, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let's go back now to CBS News Middle East contributor Courtney Keeley. Just your thoughts as we have been in this continuing coverage of the fact that Iran has appointed its new supreme leader.
Right, the third leader in its 47-year history. And it really is important to note that this is a father-to-son transfer, something that the Islamic Republic, that was based on clerical rule, broke away from with the Shah. So he's not, Mojtaba Khamenei, it does not have he's not as a high-ranking religious cleric as one might be as the supreme leader, but he will be in charge of the military, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the elite Al-Quds force that includes intelligence, and the nuclear policy. So he's considered a hardliner. He was considered a gatekeeper of his father's regime. We'll be expecting to hear similar decision-making that his father made. And remember, when the supreme leader speaks, that is the ultimate decision that is made, not the president, not a security chief, regardless of who's standing behind him and supporting him or not supporting him. He will be making these decisions, and now we will start looking to him to know what this regime is going to say in the future. He's most likely in hiding. We don't know if he's in Tehran, and we do know that he's definitely on the target list.
What do you mean by he was a gatekeeper for his father?
He worked out of the supreme leader's office. His dad was the supreme leader. His dad was a grand ayatollah. As you said before when we were speaking, Khamenei had been sort of gifted more religious creds than he actually had after Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, who took charge and returned from exile in Paris, and then he lasted in power for 10 years. So Khatami's father was in power for 37 years, and Mojtaba Khamenei, who has been it's been spoken for a while that he might become the leader because his father was ill. It was before this war. His name had been named as a possible successor. The one problem is it's father to son that has a bit of a monarchical. Well, you know, father to son, not the succession of the clerical succession. Yes.
I understand what you mean.
Right. Well, we'll get back to Farsi words and see if we can pronounce those. So Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei, it looks like sort of a dynastic succession as opposed to clerical rule. But in times of war, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is strengthened, especially that Al-Quds force, and he apparently had their backing. And while generals and top leaderships of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard keep switching because of the war, because there's so many people targeted, it does not seem like it's fractured enough to be in any way endangering the regime's hold on the people, despite all of these airstrikes.
Courtney Keeley, thank you so much. Let's go to CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd, who is joining us by phone. She is a former assistant secretary for counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security. Sam, good to talk to you. What is your initial reaction to this news?
My initial reaction is one that is not surprised in the sense that it's clear why the regime remnants would want to announce a new leader at this point. They want to signal that there is somebody in charge calling the shots, particularly when it comes to the direction being given to entities like the IRGC. You have to remember the IRGC reports directly to the supreme leader, while in practice, the military and other parts of the government report up through the president. Certainly, regime remnants want a message, not just domestically, but globally, that there's somebody in charge who is making decisions and keeping the regime functioning and cohesive. At the same time, it is very unclear how this individual, Khamenei, will be able to do this if he is in hiding, and if he ostensibly has a target in his back by the United States and by Israel.
Let's talk about that. Why announce him now, today?
The goal, I believe, is, as President Trump indicates, that he is looking for the regime's unconditional surrender, as the United States and Israel expand the kinds of targets on their target list, moving away from just military and security entities into various other kinds of infrastructure. The regime remnants certainly have a motivation to show that they can hit back and that they have a cohesive structure in place. You'll remember that a day or two ago, I believe it was a foreign minister, don't quote me on that, but a senior regime official apologized for aerial assets from Iran that had gone into neighboring countries, saying that there was a lack of command and control in the early days of the military operations. Now they are trying to show, ostensibly, that there is that command and control structure in place. But a lot of outstanding questions. Number one, does Khamenei have the ability to actually keep the regime cohesive and have command and control? Number two, does he survive? The U.S. and Israel clearly have very good intelligence on where regime officials are, so how long can he actually last? And then three, there's a longstanding question of whether the people of Iran stay, are cohesive in the sense, of course, there's been protests so far, but whether the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, whether the IRGC stay loyal to Khamenei. Now, I do think that he has strong backing from both of those entities at this point, but will he be able to maintain cohesion within the regime is an outstanding question, along with how long he just survives.
What is the current threat level here in the United States?
The threat level in the United States is very high from a counterterrorism perspective generally, and certainly the threat level from Iran has been escalating over the past few years and is probably at an all-time high in light of Operation Epic Fury. Khamenei, much like his father, is a hardliner, and in this moment is certainly looking to more than likely hit back against the United States, whether it be through proxies or surrogates in the homeland, through cyber attacks, through influence operations, or some combination of all of those things. He will also want to demonstrate, as will the rest of the regime, that, again, he has command and control over the security and intelligence services, over proxies, over surrogates, and over all those decisions. So I think that for however long he is in power and he's alive, he will want to hit back against the United States and demonstrably show that he's in charge and that he can emit power.
Sam Vinograd, thank you so much for joining us. And I do want to also mention for everybody who is watching that U.S. Central Command has posted an update on X that a U.S. National Guard soldier died in a health-related incident in Kuwait on March 6th during a medical emergency. The exact cause of death is under review. This is after U.S. Central Command had already announced the death of a 7th service member in Saudi Arabia in an attack there that took place on March 1st. We are going to continue to monitor this breaking news, but we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll take you back to the 60 Minutes Iran special, which is a historical look back at 50 years of the U.S.-Iran conflict using original 60 Minutes reporting dating back to 1974. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
I want to know what's going on in the world. You can't do that if you're just sitting in a chair, reading about what other people have found. You have to get out there and listen. By telling people about each other, you actually bring this country together. There are big questions that all of us are asking. I want to get you the answers. I'm Tony DeCopel. Join me on the CBS Evening News.
Sunday morning, we consider The Kiss, plus the Eagles' greatest hits, 50 years and counting, and meet Penny, a winner in anyone's book.
Where are some of America's funniest people getting their start?
Dutch people, not the most giving laughers.
60 Minutes goes to Amsterdam.
Dutch people laugh like this. Ha ha!
We don't want to accept that there's evil that walks amongst us, but it does.
You know how when you meet somebody, you can't put your finger on it, but something's not right?
You never know what anybody is capable of.
I am a serial killer who's only killed once.
Did you think when this goes public, this town's gonna be shocked?
Absolutely.
When you're dealing with a 30-year-old cold case, it seems like there's not a lot of hope.
We knew there was a monster out there and we were going to find him and get him.
Look at him just coming around the corner like that.
We started tracking the area.
When did this accident scene become a crime scene?
Police! You called him a lying liar who lies about lying.
Do you know why we're stopping you today?
What makes you so sure that you stabbed your sister while you were sleepwalking?
never got a chance to see her one last time.
Such injustice. I can't believe they did this to her.
But no matter how hard it gets, never give up.
I'm Natalie Morales with 48 Hours. Did you have anything to do with Joanna Hunter's death?
This is a family that just wants justice.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gail King.
Hey!
CBS Morning.
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 CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
The only way to get a 360-degree understanding of America is to get out there in America. There really is no swing at all when it comes to the priorities of everyday people. We care about how secure our job is, whether we can plan on retiring with dignity, whether our kids can have a brighter future than we have today. These are the fundamentals of American life, and I think they can be again.
In 2023, Iran began a, quote, shadow war to silence critics of the regime. Two targets of Tehran's attacks spoke with Leslie Stahl.
Tensions keep rising between the U.S. and Iran since the Israel-Hamas war began. Almost every week, Iranian-backed militias have attacked U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq. It's the latest example and a serious escalation of Tehran's use of proxy fighters like Hezbollah and Hamas. Tonight you'll hear of another type of proxy that Iran deploys that receives far less attention. Tehran is hiring hitmen around the world in an effort to intimidate, abduct, and assassinate